Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today's our lecture is about malicious software. It is chapter 6 in the book which we are referring. In this chapter, we will examine the wide spectrum of malware threats and countermeasures. We will begin with a survey of various types of malware and offer a broad classification based first on the means malware uses to spread or propagate, then on the variety of actions or payloads used once the malware has reached a target. Propagation mechanisms include those used by viruses, worms and trojans. Payloads include system corruption, bots, phishing, spyware and rootkits. The discussion concludes with a review of countermeasure approaches. The book which we are referring is the Computer Security Principles and Practice, 4th edition, William Stallings. And I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it is really pleasure reading this book. The learning objectives of today's lecture are: describe 3 broad mechanisms malware uses to propagate, understand the basic operation of viruses, worms and trojans, describe 4 broad categories of malware payloads, understand the different threat posed by bots, spyware and rootkits, describe some malware countermeasure elements, describe 3 locations for malware detection mechanisms. The first section is related to types of malicious software or malware. Malicious software or malware arguably constitutes one of the most significant categories of threats to computer systems. The definition of malware is as flashed on this slide. It is the definition as per the NIST. That is, a malware is a program that is inserted into a system, usually covertly, with the intent of compromising the confidentiality, integrity or availability of victims' data, applications or operating system, or otherwise annoying or disrupting the victim. Hence, we are concerned with the threat malware poses to the application programs, to the utility programs such as editors and compilers, and to the kernel level programs. We are also concerned with its use on compromised or malicious websites and servers, or in especially crafted spam emails or other messages which aim to trick users into revealing sensitive personal information. Various terminologies related to malware are summarized and gathered in these 4 slides, next 4 slides. As we will be going through this chapter, we will come across these terminologies such as advanced persistent threat. What is an advanced persistent threat? Cybercrime directed at business and political targets using a wide variety of intrusion technologies and malware, applied persistently and effectively to specific targets over an extended period, often attributed to state-sponsored organizations. Then adware, attack kit, backdoor, download, drive-by download, keyloggers, logic bomb, macrovirus, mobile code, rootkit, spammer program, spyware, Trojan horse, virus, worm and zoobies and bots. These are very commonly used terminologies. Coming on to the broad classification of malware, although a range of aspects can be used, one useful approach classifies malware into two broad categories, based first on how it spreads or propagates to reach the desired targets, then on the actions or the payloads it performs once a target is reached. Propagation mechanisms include infection of existing executable or interpreted content by viruses that is subsequently spread to other systems, exploit of software vulnerabilities either locally or over a network by worms or drive-by downloads to allow the malware to replicate, and social engineering attacks that convince users to bypass security mechanisms to install trojans or to respond to phishing attacks. Payload actions performed by malware once it reaches a target's system can include corruption of the system or data files, theft of the service in order to make the system a Zubi agent of attack as part of a botnet, theft of information from the system, especially of logins, passwords, and other personal details by keylogging or spyware programs, and stealthing, where the malware hides its presence on the system from attempts to detect and block it. Initially, the development and deployment of malware required considerable technical skill by software authors. This changed with the development of virus creation toolkits in the early 1990s and later of more general attack kits in the 2000s. These greatly assisted in the development and deployment of malware. These toolkits, often known as crimeware, now include a variety of propagation mechanisms and payload modules that even novices can combine, select, and deploy. The ZOS crimeware toolkit is a prominent example of such a attack kit, which was used to generate a wide range of very effective stealth malware that facilitates a range of criminal activities, in particular capturing and exploiting banking credentials. The Angular exploit kit, first seen in 2013, was the most active kit seen in 2015, often distributed via malwareizing that exploited flash vulnerabilities. It is sophisticated and technically advanced in both attacks executed and countermeasures deployed to resist detection. There are a number of other attack kits in active use, though the specific kits change from year to year as attackers continue to evolve and improve them. By following the link provided on this slide, you can find the exploit kits related to Internet Explorer. It is a very latest review of exploit kits related to Internet Explorer. You can find some more exploit kits as an assignment and share in the class, in the next class. The Internet Explorer exploit kits are the Spillevo, Fallout, Magnitude, Rig, Grandsoft, Underminer, Kaizen, Purple Fox, and Capsyn. Another significant malware development over the last couple of decades is the change from attackers being individuals, often motivated to demonstrate their technical competence to their peers, to more organized and dangerous attack sources. These include politically motivated attackers, criminals, and organized crime organizations that sell their services to companies and nations and national government agencies. This has significantly changed the resources available and motivation behind the rise of malware, and indeed has led to the development of a large underground economy involving the scale of attack kits access to compromised hosts, and to stolen information. Most recently, a Pakistani security company has discovered a data dump of 115 million Pakistani mobile users' data, which have been put on sale on the dark web on Friday, 10th April 20. This indicates that financially motivated threat actors are active in Pakistan and organizations are becoming a victim of these cyber attacks. On the terminology slide, we have already gone through the advanced persistent threats basic definition. APTs have risen to prominence in recent years. These are not a new type of malware, but rather the well-resourced persistent application of a wide variety of intrusion technologies and malware to selected targets, usually business or political. APTs are typically attributed to state-sponsored organizations, with some attacks likely from the criminal enterprises as well. Advanced persistent threats differ from other types of attack by their careful target selection and persistent, often stealthy intrusion efforts over extended periods. A number of high-profile attacks, including Aurora, RSA APT1, and Stuxnet, are often cited as the examples. You can also go through the most famous APTs in the history on the link provided on this slide. APTs are named as a result of three characteristics: advanced, persistent, and threat. First of all, what is advanced? Use by the attackers of a wide variety of intrusion technologies and malware, including the development of custom malware if required. The individual components may not necessarily be technically advanced, but are carefully selected to suit the chosen target. Persistent is determined application of the attacks over an extended period against the chosen target in order to maximize the chance of success. A variety of attacks may be progressively and often stealthily applied until the target is compromised. And the third is threats. Threats to the selected targets as a result of organized, capable, and well-funded attackers' intent to compromise the specifically chosen targets. The active involvement of the people in the process greatly raises the threat level from that due to automated attacks tools, and also the likelihood of the successful attack. The propagation of malware can be done through three ways. That is, infected content such as viruses, exploits of software vulnerability such as worms. We will briefly go through these areas comprehensively as flashed on this slide related to viruses and worms. The third way of propagation of malware is social engineering through spam emails and Trojan horses. Now we will discuss it in a little more detail to clarify our basic concepts. First of all, propagation through viruses. The first category of malware propagation concerns parasitic software fragments that attach themselves to some existing executable content. The fragment may be machine code that infects some existing application, utility, or system program, or even the code used to boot a computer system. Computer virus infections formed the majority of malware seen in the early personal computer era. More recently, the virus software fragment has been some form of scripting code typically used to support active content within data files such as Microsoft Documents, Excel data sheets, or Adobe PDF documents. A computer virus is a piece of software that can infect other programs or indeed any type of executable content by modifying them. The modification includes injecting the original code with a routine to make copies of the virus code, which can then go on to infect other content. Computer viruses first appeared in the early 1980s, and the term itself is attributed to Fred Cohen. Cohen is the author of groundbreaking book on the subject. The brain virus, first seen in 1986, was one of the first to target MS-DOS systems and resulted in a significant number of infections for this time. A virus that attaches to an executable program can do anything that the program is permitted to do. It executes secretly when the host program is run. Once the virus code is executing, it can perform any function such as erasing files and programs that is allowed by the privileges of the current user. One reason viruses dominated the malware scene in earlier years was the lack of the user authentication and access controls on personal computer systems at that time. This enabled a virus to infect any executable content on the system. There are three parts of a computer virus. More generally, many contemporary types of malware also include one or more variants of each of these components. That is the infection mechanism, trigger, and payload. First of all, infection mechanism. The means by which a virus spreads or propagates, enabling it to replicate, is called the infection mechanism. The mechanism is also referred to as the infection vector. Then is the trigger, the event or condition that determines when the payload is activated or delivered, and sometimes it is known as logic bomb. The third is payload, what the virus does besides spreading. The payload may involve damage or may involve benign but unnoticeable activity. During its lifetime, a typical virus goes through the following four phases. That is the dormant phase, propagation phase, triggering phase, and execution phase. In the dormant phase, the virus is idle. The virus will eventually be activated by some event such as a date, the presence of another program or file, or the capacity of the disk exceeding some limit. Not all viruses have this stage. The next is the propagation phase. In this phase, the virus places a copy of itself into another program or into certain system areas on the disk. The copy may not be identical to the propagating version. Viruses often morph to evade detection. Each infected program will now contain a clone of the virus, which will itself enter a propagation phase. The third phase is the triggering phase. The virus is activated to perform the function for which it was intended. As with the dormant phase, the triggering phase can be caused by a variety of system events, including a count of the number of the times that this copy of virus has made copies of itself. In the execution phase, the function is performed. The function may be harmless, such as a message on the screen, or damaging, such as destruction of the programs and data files. Most viruses that infect executable program files carry out their work in a manner that is specific to a particular operating system, and in some cases specific to a particular hardware platform. Thus, they are designed to take advantage of the details and weaknesses of particular systems. Macroviruses, however, target specific document types, which are often supported on a variety of systems. Now, we will go through this important form of the viruses, that the macro and the scripting viruses. The definition of macroviruses is as flashed. A macrovirus is defined as a virus that attaches itself to documents and uses the macro programming capabilities of the document's application to execute and propagate. In the mid-1990s, macro or scripting code viruses became by far the most prevalent type of virus. Macroviruses infect scripting code used to support active content in a variety of user document types. Macroviruses are particularly threatening for a number of reasons. Number one, a macrovirus is platform independent. Many macroviruses infect active content in commonly used applications, such as macros in Microsoft Word documents or other Microsoft Office documents, or scripting code in Adobe PDF documents. Any hardware platform and operating system that supports these applications can be infected. Number two, macroviruses infect documents, not executable portions of code. Most of the information introduced onto a computer system is in the form of documents rather than programs. Number three, macroviruses are easily spread as the documents they exploit are shared in normal use. A very common method is by electronic mail, particularly since these documents can sometimes be opened automatically without prompting the user. Number four, because macroviruses infect user documents rather than the system programs, traditional file system access controls are of limited use in preventing this spread, since users are expected to modify them. Number five, macroviruses are much easier to write or to modify than traditional executable viruses. Macroviruses take advantage of support for active content using a scripting or macro language embedded in the word processing document or other type of file. Typically, users employ macros to automate repetitive tasks and thereby save keystrokes. Now coming on to the classification of viruses. There has been a continuous arms race between virus writers and writers of antivirus software since viruses first appeared. As effective countermeasures are developed for existing types of viruses, newer types are developed. There is no simple or universally agreed upon classification scheme for viruses. In this part, we'll classify viruses along two orthogonal axes, that is, the type of target the virus tries to infect and the method the virus uses to conceal itself from detection by users and antivirus software. A virus classification by target includes the categories as flashed on this slide. The boot sector infector infects a master boot record or boot record and spreads when a system is booted from disk containing the virus. File infector infects file that the operating system or shell consider to be executable. Macrovirus infects files with macro or scripting code that is interpreted by an application. Multipartite virus infects files in multiple ways. Typically, the multipartite virus is capable of infecting multiple types of files, so virus eradication must deal with all of the possible sites of infection. A virus classification by concealment strategy includes 4 categories. These are flashed on this slide. The first one is the encrypted virus, a form of virus that uses encryption to obscure its content. A portion of the virus creates a random encryption key and encrypts the remainder of the virus. The key is stored with the virus. When an infected program is invoked, the virus uses the stored random key to decrypt the virus. When the virus replicates, a different random key is selected because the bulk of the virus is encrypted with a different key for each instance. There is no constant bit pattern to observe. The next category is the stealth virus, a form of virus explicitly designed to hide itself from detection from anti-virus software. Thus, the entire virus, not just a payload, is hidden. It may use code, mutation, compression, or rootkit techniques to achieve this. Polymorphic virus is the third category of the concealment strategy viruses, a form of virus that creates copies during replication that are functionally equivalent but have distinctly different bit patterns in order to defeat programs that scan for viruses. In this case, the signature of the virus will vary with each copy. To achieve this variation, the virus may randomly insert superfluous instructions or interchange the order of independent instructions. A more effective approach is to use encryption. The strategy of the encryption virus is followed. The portion of the virus that is responsible for generating keys and performing encryption-decryption is referred to as mutation engine. The mutation engine itself is altered with each use. Metamorphic virus, as with the polymorphic virus, a metamorphic virus mutates with every infection. The difference is that a metamorphic virus rewrites itself completely on each iteration using multiple transformation techniques, increasing the difficulty of detection. Metamorphic viruses may change their behavior as well as their appearance. Now coming on to propagation through worms. The next category of malware propagation concerns the exploit of software vulnerabilities which are commonly exploited by computer worms and hacking attacks on systems. A worm is a program that actively seeks out more machines to infect, and then each infected machine serves as an automated launching pad for attacks on other machines. Worm programs exploit software vulnerabilities in client or server programs to gain access to each new system. They can use network connections to spread from system to system. They can also spread through shared media such as USB drives or CD or DVD data disks, email worms can spread in macro or script code included in the documents attached to email or to instant messenger file transfers. Upon activation, the worm may replicate and propagate again. In addition to propagation, the worm usually carries some form of payload, such as those we will discuss later. To replicate itself, a worm uses more means to access remote systems. These include following, most of which are still seen in active user. That is, the electronic mail, file sharing, remote execution capability, remote file access or transfer capability, and remote login capability. Electronic mail or instant messenger facility, a worm emails a copy of itself to other systems or sends itself as an attachment via an instant message service, so that its code is run when the email or attachment is received or viewed. In file sharing, a worm either creates a copy of itself or infects other suitable files as a virus on removable media such as USB drive. It then executes when the drive is connected to another system using the auto-run mechanism by exploiting some software vulnerability or when a user opens the infected file on the target system. In case of remote execution capability, a worm executes a copy of itself on another system either by using an explicit remote execution facility or by exploiting a program flaw in a network service to subvert its operations. Remote file access or transfer capability, a worm uses a remote file access or transfer service to another system to copy itself from one system to the other, where users on the system may then execute it. In remote login capability, a worm logs on to a remote system as a user and then uses commands to copy itself from one system to the other, where it then executes. The new copy of the worm program is then run on the remote system, where in addition to the payload functions that it performs on the system, it continues to propagate. A worm typically uses the same phases as computer virus, that is dormant, propagation, triggering, and execution, as flashed in this slide as well. The propagation phase generally performs different functions, that is, search for appropriate access mechanisms on other systems to infect by examining host tables, address books, buddy lists, trusted peers, and other similar repositories of remote system access details by scanning possible target host addresses or by searching for suitable removable media devices to use. Use the access mechanisms found to transfer a copy of itself to the remote system and cause the copy to be run. The worm may also attempt to determine whether a system has previously been infected before copying itself to the system. In a multi-programming system, it can also disguise its presence by naming itself as a system process or using some other name that may not be noticed by a system operator. More recent worms can even inject their code into existing processes on the system and run using additional threads in the process to further disguise their presence. Target discovery. The first function in the propagation phase for a network worm is for it to search for other systems to infect, a process known as scanning or fingerprinting. For such worms which exploit software vulnerabilities in remotely accessible network services, it must identify potential systems running the vulnerable service and then infect them. Then typically the worm code now installed on the infected machines repeats the same scanning process until a large distributed network of infected machines is created. Types of network address scanning strategies that a worm can use is as flashed on this slide, that is random, hit list, topological, local subnet. Please go through the further details of these strategies in the book we are referring. Now we will go through the brief history of the worms. Melissa email worm was created in 1998, the first of the new generation of the malware that included aspects of virus, worm and Trojan in one package. In 1999, a more powerful version of this email virus was created. In 3 days, 100,000 computers were infected. The next is the red code worm, which first appeared in July 2001. Code Red exploits a security hole in the Microsoft Internet Information Servers (IIS) to penetrate and spread. It infected 360,000 servers in 14 hours. Nimda worm that appeared in September 2001, it also had the capability of worm, virus and mobile code characteristics. In early 2003, the SQL Slammer worm appeared. This worm exploited a buffer overflow vulnerability in Microsoft SQL Server. Late 2003 saw the arrival of SOBIG-F worm. It exploited open proxy servers to turn infected machines into spam engines. MyDoom is a mass mailing email worm that appeared in 2004. It installed a backdoor in infected computers, thereby enabling hackers to gain remote access to data such as passwords and credit card numbers. The Verzo family of worms appeared in 2006. The Configure, or it is also known as DownAdap worm, was first detected in November 2008. In 2010, the Stuxnet worm was detected, though it had been spreading quietly for some time previously. In late 2011, the Duku worm was discovered, which uses code related to that in the Stuxnet. In May 2017, the WannaCry ransomware attack spread extremely rapidly. Over a period of hours to days, infected hundreds of thousands of systems belonging to both public and private organizations in more than 150 countries. Now coming on to the mobile code. Mobile code is transmitted from a remote system to a local system, then executed on the local system without a user's explicit instruction. Mobile code often acts as a mechanism for a virus, worm or Trojan horse to be transmitted to the user's workstation. In other cases, mobile code takes advantage of vulnerabilities to perform its own exploits, such as unauthorized data access or root compromise. Popular vehicles of mobile code include Java applets, ActiveX, JavaScript, and VBScript. The most common methods of using mobile code for malicious operations on local system are cross-site scripting, interactive and dynamic websites, email attachments, and downloads from untrusted sites or of untrusted software. The definition of mobile code as per NIST is as flashed. A mobile code is a program, that is a script, macro or other portable instruction that can be shipped unchanged to a heterogeneous collection of platforms and executed with identical semantics. Next is the mobile phone worms. Worms first appeared on mobile phones with the discovery of Cabir worm in 2004, then Lasco and ComWarrior in 2005. These worms communicate through Bluetooth wireless connections or via the MMS. Early mobile worms targeted mobile phones using the Symbian operating system. More recent malware targets Android and iPhone systems. Mobile phone malware can completely disable the phone, delete data on the phone, or force the device to send costly messages to premium priced numbers. Now coming on to the client side vulnerabilities and drive-by downloads. This is another approach to exploiting software vulnerabilities, which involves the exploit of bugs in user applications to install malware. Views a web page controlled by the attacker. It contains code that exploits the bug to download and install malware on the system without the user's knowledge or consent. This is known as drive-by download and is a common exploit in recent attack kits. Multiple vulnerabilities in the Adobe Flash Player and Oracle Java plugins have been exploited. Now many browsers are now removing the support for them due to this very reason. Clickjacking. Clickjacking, also known as the user interface redress attack, is a vulnerability used by an attacker to collect an infected user's clicks. The attacker can force the user to do a variety of things, from adjusting the user's computer settings to unwittingly sending the user to websites that might have malicious code. Also, by taking advantage of Adobe Flash or JavaScript, an attacker could even place a button under or over a legitimate button, making it difficult for users to detect. Now we will start with the next section, that is the propagation through social engineering. The final category of malware propagation we consider involves social engineering. It is tricking users to assist in compromise of their own systems or personal information. This can occur when a user views and responds to some spam email or permits the installation and execution of some Trojan horse program or scripting code. Watch the video on the YouTube provided on this link to have a clear understanding with respect to social engineering. Now we will start with the very important topic, that is payloads of malware. Payload actions performed by malware once it reaches a target system can include corruption of system or data files, theft of service in order to make the system a zombie agent of attack as part of botnet, theft of information from the system, especially of logins, passwords, or other personal details by keylogging or spyware programs. And it also includes stealthing where the malware hides its presence on the system from attempts to detect and block it. Examples of stealthing technologies are backdoor and rootkits. First of all, payloads used for system corruption. First, we will talk about system corruption due to payloads in a worm. An early payload seen in a number of viruses and worms resulted in data destruction on the infected system when certain trigger conditions were met. A related payload is one that displays unwanted messages or content on the user systems when triggered. More seriously, another variant attempts to inflict real-world damage on the system. All of these actions target the integrity of the computer system software or hardware or of the user's data. These changes may not occur immediately, but only when a specific trigger conditions are met that satisfy their logic bomb code. Few examples of data destruction, ransomware, real-world damage, and logic bomb are shown on this slide. Chernobyl virus was created in 1998 and 1999. It resulted in massive corruption of hard disk drives. Class mass mailing worm was created on 26th April 2001. It resulted in emptying the files. Some important ransomware in the history are PC Cyborg Trojan seen in 1989, GP Code Trojan in mid-2006. WannaCry was used and created in year 2017. The real-world damage examples are Chernobyl virus, which also corrupts the BIOS, and the Stuxnet, which damaged the industrial control systems of Siemens. Tim Lloyd set a logic bomb inflicting US$ 10 million loss to Omega Engineering. To further clarify our thoughts, you may go through the relevant section in the computer security textbook which we are referring to in this course. The next category of payload we discuss is where the malware subverts the computational and network resources of the infected system for use by the attacker. Such a system is known as a bot or robot, which is the short form of robot. Zombie or drone, these are also the words which are used for the bots, and it secretly takes over another internet attached computer, then uses that computer to launch or manage attacks that are difficult to trace to the bot's creator. The bot is typically planted on hundreds or thousands of computers belonging to unsuspecting third parties. The compromised systems are not just personal computers, but include servers and recently embedded devices such as routers or surveillance cameras. The collection of bots often is capable of acting in a coordinated manner. Such a collection is referred to as botnet. This type of payload attacks the integrity and availability of the infected system. The remote control facility is what distinguishes a bot from a worm. A worm propagates itself and activates itself, whereas a bot is controlled by some form of command and control server network. Bots are used for distributed denial of service attacks, spamming, sniffing traffic, keylogging, spreading new malware, installing browser helper objects, installing advertisement add-ons, attacking internet relay chat networks, and manipulating online polls and games. Now we will be starting with payloads used for information theft. We now consider payloads where the malware gathers data stored on the infected system for use by the attacker. A common target is the user's login and password credentials to banking, gaming, and related sites, which the attacker then uses to impersonate the user to access these sites for gain. Less commonly, the payload may target documents or system configuration details for the purpose of reconnaissance or espionage. These attacks target the confidentiality of the information. Now coming on to the credential theft using keyloggers and spyware. Typically, users send their login and password credentials to banking, gaming, and related sites over encrypted communication channels, for example, HTTPS or POP3S, which protect them from capture by monitoring network packets. To bypass this, an attacker can install a keylogger which captures the keystrokes on the infected machine to allow an attacker to monitor his sensitive information. Since this would result in the attacker receiving a copy of all text entered on the compromised machine, keyloggers typically implement some form of filtering mechanism that only returns information close to desired keywords, for example, login or password or paypal.com. In response to the use of the keyloggers, some banking and other sites switched to using a graphical applet to enter critical information, such as passwords. Since these do not use text entered via the keyboard, traditional keyloggers do not capture this information. In response, attackers developed more general spyware payloads which subvert the compromised machine to allow monitoring of a wide range of activity on the system. This may include monitoring the history and content of browsing activity, redirecting certain web page requests to fake sites controlled by attacker, and dynamically modifying data exchanged between the browser and certain websites of interest, all of which can result in significant compromise of users' personal information. The Zeus banking Trojan, created from its crimeware toolkit, is a prominent example of such spyware that has been widely deployed. It steals banking and financial credentials using both a keylogger and capturing and possibly altering form data for certain websites. It is typically deployed using either spam emails or via a compromised website in a drive-by download. And another approach used to capture users' login and password credentials is to include a URL in a spam email that links to a fake website controlled by the attacker, but which mimics the login page of some banking, gaming, or similar site. This is normally included in some message suggesting that urgent action is required by the user to authenticate their account to prevent it being locked. If the user is careless and does not realize that they are being conned, then following the link and supplying the requested details will certainly result in the attackers exploiting their account using the captured credentials. More generally, such a spam email may direct a user to a fake website controlled by the attacker, or to complete some enclosed form and return to an email accessible to the attacker, which is used to gather a range of private personal information on the user. Given sufficient details, the attacker can then assume the user's identity for the purpose of obtaining credit or sensitive access to other resources. This is known as phishing attack and exploits social engineering to leverage users' trust by masquerading as communications from a trusted source. Now coming on to reconnaissance and espionage, credential theft and identity theft are special cases of a more general reconnaissance payload which aims to obtain certain types of desired information and return this to the attacker. The examples are as flashed on the slide. WikiLeaks leak of sensitive military and diplomatic documents by Chelsea Manning in 2010. We all know that. Release of information on NSA surveillance programs by Edward Snowden in 2013. In 2015, release of personal information on the users of the Ashley Madison adult website is another example. 2016, Panama Papers, which leak of millions of documents relating to offshore entities used as tax havens, which has been applied to our political personalities. The first two are the examples of the insiders exploiting their legitimate access rights to release information for ideological reasons. The last two examples are exploits carried out by outsiders. Now coming on to the payload used for stealthing. The final category of payload we discuss concerns techniques used by malware to hide its presence on the infected system and to provide covert access to the system. This type of payload also attacks the integrity of the infected system. One technique used for stealthing is the backdoor. A backdoor, also known as trapdoor, is a secret entry point into a program that allows someone who is aware of the backdoor to gain access without going through the usual security access procedures. Programmers have used backdoors legitimately for many years to debug and test programs, such as backdoor is called a maintenance hook. Backdoors become threats when unscrupulous programmers use them to gain unauthorized access. In more recent times, a backdoor is usually implemented as a network service listening on some non-standard port that the attacker can connect to and issue commands through to be run on the compromised system. For example, WannaCry worm used the backdoor. The other technique or technology is the rootkit. A rootkit is a set of programs installed on a system to maintain covert access to that system with administrator or root privileges, when hiding evidence of its presence to the greatest extent possible. This provides access to all the functions and services of the operating system. The rootkit alters the host standard functionality in a malicious and stealthy way. With root access, an attacker has complete control of the system and can add or change programs and files, monitor processes, send and receive network traffic, and get backdoor access on demand. Kernel mode rootkits are next generation rootkits. A rootkit can make changes to a system to hide its existence, making it difficult for the user to determine that the rootkit is present and to identify when changes have been made. In essence, a rootkit hides by subverting the mechanisms that monitor and report on the processes, files, and registries on a computer. We now consider possible countermeasures for malware. These are generally known as antivirus mechanisms, as they were first developed to specifically target virus infections. However, they have evolved to address most of the types of the malware we have discussed in this lecture. The ideal solution to the threat of malware is prevention. Do not allow malware to get into the system in the first place, or block the ability of it to modify the system. This goal is in general nearly impossible to achieve, although taking suitable countermeasures to harden systems and users in preventing infection can significantly reduce the number of successful malware attacks. NIST special publication 883 suggests that there are 4 main elements of prevention, that is policy, awareness, vulnerability mitigation, and threat mitigation. Having a suitable policy to address malware prevention provides a basis for implementing appropriate preventive countermeasures. Countermeasure 1 is one of the first countermeasures that should be employed is to ensure that all systems are as current as possible with all patches applied in order to reduce the number of vulnerabilities that might be exploited on the system. Countermeasure 2 is to set appropriate access controls on the applications and data stored on the system to reduce the number of files that any user can access and hence potentially infect or corrupt as a result of them executing some malware code. These measures directly target the key propagation mechanisms used by worms, viruses, and some Trojans. This is also covered in hardening operating systems and applications. The countermeasure 3 is also a preventive measure. The third common propagation mechanism, which targets users in a social engineering attack, can be countered using the appropriate user awareness and training. This aims to equip users to be more aware of these attacks and less likely to take actions that result in their compromise. Countermeasure 4 is related to mitigation. If prevention fails, the technical mechanisms can be used to support threat mitigation options, which are detection, identification, and removal. First of all, detection. Once the infection has occurred, determine that it has occurred and locate the malware. The second is identification. Once detection has been achieved, identify the specific malware that has infected the system. And the third one is removal. Once the specific malware has been identified, remove all traces of malware virus from all infected systems so it cannot spread further. If detection succeeds, but either identification or removal is not possible, then the alternative is to discard any infected or malicious files and reload a clean backup version. In the case of some particular nasty infections, this may require a complete wipe of all storage and rebuild the infected system from known clean media. Let us consider some requirements for effective malware countermeasures. These include generality, timeliness, resilience, minimal denial of service cost, and first of all we will consider generality. The approach taken should be able to handle a wide variety of attacks. The second requirement is timeliness. The approach should respond quickly so to limit the number of infected programs or systems and the consequent activity. Resilience, the approach should be resistant to evasion techniques employed by attackers to hide the presence of their malware. There should be minimal denial of service costs. The approach should result in minimal reduction in capacity or service due to the actions of the countermeasure software and should not significantly disrupt normal operations. The next is transparency. The countermeasure software and devices should not require modification to the existing legacy operating systems, application software and hardware. The next requirement is global and local coverage. The approach should be able to deal with attack sources both from outside and inside the enterprise network. Achieving all these requirements often requires the use of multiple approaches with a defense in depth strategy. Detection of presence of malware can occur in a number of locations. It may occur on the infected system where some host-based antivirus program is running, monitoring data imported to the system, and the execution of behavior of programs running on the system. The first location where antivirus program is used is on each end system. The antivirus software have 4 generations. First generation antivirus are simple scanners. Second generation are heuristic scanners. The third generation are activity traps, and fourth generation antivirus provide full featured protection. Or it may take place as part of the perimeter security mechanisms used in an organization's firewall and intrusion detection system. Lastly, detection may use distributed mechanisms that gather data from both host-based and perimeter sensors, potentially over a large number of networks and organizations, in order to obtain the largest scale view of the movement of the malware. Other related countermeasure approaches are sandbox analysis, host-based dynamic malware analysis, spyware detection and removal, rootkit countermeasures, which have been covered in this book. Please go through these chapters and topics. You are also required to go through the NIST Special Procedure 883, which has provided examples of suitable awareness issues related to social engineering, and submit it in the next class as an assignment. The other assignments are related to this chapter are the review questions from question number 6.1 to 6.16 and the tasks which have been discussed on the previous slide. Please prepare them and submit it during the next class. You are also required to go through the tutorials on the subject on the provided links. These are the links which have been researched by me, and you may go through these tutorials in your own time. The summary of today's lecture is we have covered 3 broad mechanisms malware uses to propagate. We have tried to understand the basic operation of viruses, worms and trojans. We have covered 4 broad categories of malware payloads, understood the different threats posed by bots, spyware and rootkits, We have discussed some malware countermeasure elements, and we have described 3 locations of malware detection mechanisms. Thank you. This comes to the end of today's lecture. If you have any questions, you can shoot now. You can contact me for any assistance and help, and for submitting the assignments on the provided contact information. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.